you, and good afternoon, everyone, or good morning, depending on where you're dialing in from. And yeah, delighted to be able to present to you today in collaboration with the GPA, focused very much on, as Mel alluded to, global expansion. And Mel's right, it's a huge topic. It's a very hot topic right now. I mean, only in the last 24, 48 hours or so, you only have to Google, global expansion and companies that are setting out on that journey. Almac Group, a $250 million investment to support their global expansion plans. Pay Cargo, 130 million. Infocat, 83 million. It's hot, it's happening. And I don't think that's set to change anytime soon. So it's a really exciting topic we're going to talk to you about today over the course of the next 45 minutes to an hour or so. So as Mel alludes to, I'm Peter Durran. I lead the EMEA commercial team here at Amedus. My background stems about 15, almost 20 years. I don't want to necessarily say that because it probably alludes to how old I am, but about 15 to 20 years in the world of recruitment, HR and payroll solutions and services and technology. And now, as Mel alludes to, part of the EMEA commercial team as well. And in terms of today's focus, we're going to kind of take you through that journey, I guess, from looking at what are the trends currently around expansion, global expansion, what's driving the growth, expansion of operations aligned to strategic objectives of CEOs and organizations overall. We'll look at the change in workforce models as part of that, M&A activity, hyper growth, global mobility, and the benefit that will have to support the growth. And then very much focused on payroll and enabling itself as a function to really be a strategic advisor to the business, to the C-suite, to support their global expansion plans. So without further ado, we'll get straight in and we'll kick off and look at some of the expansion trends. And I think I don't think I'm too surprised when I see this piece of research, and certainly when we speak to organisations ourselves at Amedus, growth is at the forefront really of what a lot of the conversations are based on. And despite the pandemic despite the pandemic overall, and now the kind of pandemic-induced economic crisis that we're all going through and experiencing, either at an individual level or at an organisation level, growth is still very much a priority for many organisations and many CEOs across the globe. I think it's fair to say now there's probably fewer CEOs than last year, however, they expect new opportunities to come through old mechanisms like simple kind of incremental sales growth, and they are now looking to new markets as the source for opportunities beyond their home regions. The biggest kind of movers in there, although growth is there and it's prevalent at 56%, but there's some big movers in there as well, and this very much I think ties into some of the impacts, some of the positive impacts really around the pandemic, and that's very much focused around technology related initiatives, digitizing the workforce, and indeed workforce overall. I think there's a recognition that CEOs and organizations acknowledge the toll of the pandemic, and 2020, 2021 took on people, and now the role that skilled talent will play in enabling organizations to meet their new goals moving forward. So there's some significant jumps there around the focus on workforce and the focus around technology enabled digitization across the organization as well. And the factors that are prompting this kind of global expansion that CEOs and businesses are still very much focused on, access to new markets, and again, we speak to a lot of organizations that have a big focus on the European market. Netherlands, Holland, tends to come up more and more times, and you consider the major European economies that are surrounded around Holland, Germany, UK, France, all are within half a day's reach of the Netherlands. So, just having operations in Netherlands, infrastructure in Netherlands as one example, really then opens up opportunities within the rest of Europe and beyond. Some of you may have heard these kind of analysis, but it always intrigues me when I do. If you were to draw a 300-mile radius around Netherlands, you're accessing 150, 200 million consumers just from that central location. So when we talk about access to new markets and expanding beyond home geographies, you start to understand why that's so important for so many organizations. Access to talent, well, is a big focus. And I guess when you say about access to talent, quite often, again, if we focus again on the European space, the multilingual capabilities, the language capabilities across Europe is a significant positive to organizations, combined also with the kind of cultural knowledge, people that really understand consumers across different regions, the cultures, across those various territories as well. So there's lots of different factors that are driving that global expansion. And there's just two really nice examples there, I think, around accessing new markets beyond home regions and also accessing talent and the advantages that will naturally bring. And then if we look at the kind of factors contributing to that global expansion, and you'll see that there's 5 on screen. What interests me and something I personally strongly believe in, and again, speaking to CFOs, to finance directors, to payroll managers, CHROs, etc., as part of my role and my team's role at Amidus, the changing workforce model that everyone's really experiencing or have experienced over the last 2 years, and in the main is set to stay now moving forward, whether that's fully remote or a hybrid type working environment. Those changes were going to come anyway. They're going to come in 5, 10, 15 years time maximum. COVID has really just expedited that and brought a lot of those changes forward, and they've happened already now, and it's brought it forward, and we've proven those models can work and can work successfully. So all of a sudden it's set a new norm for workforce models, and whether that's fully remote or, as I say, a type of hybrid model, it's a significant factor now that's leading to that drive around global expansion, because actually people don't need to be office based. They don't be located in the country of the organization. They can indeed be back in their country of birth, for example, across the globe if need be. And if you tie back previously to the focus on digitization and technology related enablement, enabling individuals to work from home, work remotely, yet keep business continuity, really plays into that as well when you consider those workforce models and how that's changed so drastically over the last 2 years, and certainly sped up what was most likely going to happen in 5, 10 years time anyway, as I allude to. And then if you, I guess, then consider, okay, and there's a borderless business study here by Standard Chartered, and I believe Mel will share the deck after the webinar today, and you'll be able to access some of this research behind the figures you're seeing on screen. There's a big focus on particularly European territories, but beyond. And again, it goes back to that recognition that particularly US companies, they see their biggest growth opportunities now outside of their home region. And even more so now than maybe mid 2020 or early 2020. And that's because of the comfort level, really, I think, probably around the kind of that reimagine, that new workforce model that we've just been speaking about. What is interesting here, though, and we start thinking about, I guess, some of the challenges now around kind of expansion and international expansion. If you just look at those 10 countries that are on screen, from UK to China to Japan, Germany, etc., the variation around taxation, around HR and payroll legislation in these 10 countries alone is huge, and it's significant. And that instantly brings about those challenges when organizations aren't currently operating in those regions today, but there certainly are target markets. They're looking to move into those markets, navigating that minefield really of things like employment and labor, taxation, employment and labor law and legislation. It gets extremely complicated very quickly, and it's safe to say that most executives, even though they have their aspirations of global expansion, they also know the challenges that that will entail. And I think, as I say, it's fair to say, people understanding the local laws, the regulations that are governing those key target markets is absolutely critical, whether it's tax implications, trading laws, whether it's actual payroll compliance, as I say, whether it's compliance around treasury and actually making payments to individuals, statutory payments, third-party payments. All those things need to be considered because they vary and they differ vastly country by country. And I guess if organizations don't have that knowledge in-house today, they should certainly be looking to work with partners, with HR and payroll partners that do have that level of expertise that they can best support the organization going through this expansion, going through the intended expansion into new markets, so that they can be best enabled and best prepared to be ready to expand when that actually comes about. So there's some significant challenges, as I say, around international expansion, and CEOs and executives aren't burying their head in the sand about that. It's very much recognized, and research out there shows it. And I was just alluding to, I think, the kind of the payroll success factors when you consider payroll as part of that expansion. Questions I think organizations should probably be asking themselves when they know the expansion map and those key target geographies is things like, can my payroll provider, do they have the ability, do they have the experience, the credentials to meet my expansion needs? Are they actually delivering payroll in these new markets I'm going to be moving into today? For how long for? At what volume? They're all proactive questions that you can start probing around to understand the scale and the capability of your existing infrastructure in order to ensure it's not going to inhibit any growth plans as part of that. Quite often, number two, onboarding new employees in new regions, that can also get pretty complicated when you're entering into a new market for the first time and you're trying to navigate all the pieces of payroll, in-country payroll data that needs to be required for payroll processing to be fully compliant. Understanding that proactively and in advance is critical. If you're not doing that and your payroll partner's not able to surface that level of information to you, you obviously run the risk of getting into actual payroll processing stage towards the back end of a payroll calendar, then finding out about local legislation, laws, statutory requirements, and potentially it's too late at that point to try and find all that data. So certainly a proactive lens, a proactive focus on what it takes, what's entailed in onboarding new employees into these regions to ensure payroll compliance is absolutely critical. And I think that probably plays into the third point on there around accessing kind of in-country input data requirements that need to be gathered. Get in line of sight on that early, start building and gathering that information, not necessarily just from a payroll perspective, but also from things like an entity setup perspective as well. There's lots of considerations around that, not just at a payroll level, but at more a corporate level as well, that are things that certainly should have a focus moving forward. And as I say, if you don't have that knowledge and expertise in-house, really, you should be working with a payroll partner that does have that level of knowledge and expertise and experience to be able to guide you through that journey. And changing workforce models, as we were just speaking about as well, and it's supported by lots of conversations and research. My belief that what's happened over the last 2 years was going to happen anyway. COVID spread it up. So for all the disastrous consequences of the pandemic, there are lots of positives. And for me, a positive is actually, globally, really, there's a reimagined, there's a redefined way of working, there's a redefined workforce now that is having huge benefits and adding huge value into organizations as they move forward. And what's nice to see is actually the employers are recognizing that, and they are indeed very focused on the remote global workforce model. They are looking at flexible workspaces and they consider that playing a key role in business success. There's a big focus on that. This study here on the screen here, mostly by EY. I then flip to employees and their expectations, and indeed it matches what the employers are also focused on. You know, employees looking for that flexible way of where they work and when they work. You know, they want that flexibility that they kind of got used to and attuned to, and it's now really a norm as a result of the last 2 years. And that's very much their new way of life, their new way of working, and that's what they're demanding and seeking moving forward. Because obviously the model has been proven to work, forced upon everyone, but proven to work now. So the comfort levels around it are so much greater, which is nice to see. Obviously that there's that correlation, and there's not a disconnect there really. And when you consider the kind of work from home piece in particular, you know, there has to be a focus and an appreciation of employees. When you say working from home, that might actually also mean working from their own actual birth country, as opposed to their country where they have lived for work purposes, maybe leading up to the pandemic. There was obviously a lot of individuals, a lot of families relocated and moved back to native countries and similar during the pandemic. So there has to be an appreciation and focus on that, and that may well stay the same moving forward. I think with that in mind, it's then appreciation and a focus needs to be around taxation implications of that. Are we having to run shadow payrolls? Is there double duplicate taxation requirements, social security requirements of both you know, host country and working country, etc. So there has to be a focus around now, I think, and we're seeing it with conversations. We're seeing more and more questions around that with conversations we're having with payroll individuals in particular, about how to handle certain situations where people are you know, their working circumstances, their working locations have now changed and are set to stay moving forward. Business continuity and compliance on there, you know, both have to be maintained. And I think this probably, when you consider the remote workforce or hybrid workforce, those two factors, when you go back to that previous study that had such a significant focus on technology enablement, digitization, being able to control and ensure things like business continuity, being able to control and govern compliance aspects, having the technology underpinning that is vital, given people are so remote now in the main, albeit even if they are slightly hybrid and do get into some offices at some points in time. Having an underlying platform to manage that and control that is vital to ensure exactly that business continuity can continue, and the compliance factor, the control, the governance are there, and the visibility is there to indeed ensure compliance, whether that's around payroll tax or employment law, work permits and visas. You know, the list, I guess, kind of goes on there from that aspect. So, you know, considerations really for the kind of changing landscape of, you know, particularly around the workforce, you know, flexibility, all things I think we've really probably just kind of touched on to varying degrees, but, you know, the flexibility, the option to work from home and be fully supported by the employer, particularly with a focus on HR policies to enable that and support that, the contractual arrangements. Are we compliant from a tax and payroll obligation perspective? And again, if you're not sure of things like that and you don't have the know-how and knowledge in-house, that is where you really should be looking to your payroll partner and their expertise and know-how, because they'll be seeing this, like what we are at Amidus, they'll be seeing this across the globe with many organizations they're speaking with. So they should be able to guide you and offer you levels of support and advice around those types of things. Corporation tax considerations also come into play, just taking it a step beyond payroll there. You know, tracking employee movements also important. For me, there's almost an extra strand there around employee movements, and probably something that's not on there that I do personally believe in, if I can for a second, is that element of the health and well-being factor of people working from home, working remotely, but how are we tracking their employee movements? How are we tracking their health, their well-being, their mental state of mind when they are so remote and potentially so isolated? So there's a lot of things around there around tracking, understanding, monitoring employee actions and activities. And as I say, you know, remote working can bring great benefits. That's been proven. It's there but it does also have its cost. And there are costs to remote working as well that has to be taken into, I guess, consideration. And then we move on to, M&A activity. And when we say M&A, it could be merger, acquisition, or indeed the concept of, consolidation as well. And just, I guess, to kind of be clear on the definitions of those three, organizations. And again, we speak to lots of organizations that are going through, M&A type activity, whether they're merging, when the two companies are combining and seek shareholder approval to indeed merge. Whether it's a simple acquisition and the acquiring company essentially takes control and a majority stake in the acquired, or indeed a consolidation where two or maybe more companies come together and a new organization, a new structure is created, and in many ways take all the best bits out of the 2 or 3 or 4 that have come together, leaving maybe the not so good bits behind. So there's kind of 3 main kind of scenarios there that we see. In my personal experience and conversations we speak to, most of what we're seeing with our customers is more around the acquisition, companies growing through acquisitions. And we'll get on to just very shortly some of the challenges around that holistically across the organization, but particularly from a payroll perspective, when you're acquiring an organization, acquiring a new set of employees in a new market, the challenges that can also bring as well. And yeah, the M&A growth, as I think I was probably just alluding to, it's on the increase and will continue to increase for years to come, I'm sure. China's a fascinating region for this. Their M&A activity is significant. In 2021, there's close to 13,000 deals closed around M&A activity, up 20-25% from previous year. And that's widespread across the globe. China's just one prevalent example. It's an obvious example. Much of the M&A activity out there is PE funded, and by far the largest backed M&A activity tends to be PE funded out there. But certainly is significant, and it's here to stay, and that will continue to stay, that growth around mergers and acquisitions moving forward as well. However, that doesn't come without its challenges, and there's many research out, lots of research out there that shows there are quite high failure rates of M&A, somewhere between 70 and 90%, as a result of some of the challenges that are brought about as a result of merger or acquisition type activity. Integrating different organizations, just a challenge of that, not just from a cultural perspective, but also from a technology perspective. Integrating and absorbing new employees on new payroll structures, new pay frequencies, new methods of paying, whether that's producing bank files and completing payments in-house, or if they had previously outsourced that. All these things have to come together and slowly form as one. And quite often in an M&A type scenario, when systems are coming together, companies then will have a transition agreement with their existing provider before they move over to the acquired company. So there's quite often a defined timeline in which the transition has to occur. So it's also quite time pressured as well to ensure that employees can be onboarded onto new payroll successfully and in a fairly risk-free manner. And again, when we think about some of the challenges of growth overall, acquisition growth is not excluded in that at all, because quite often the companies we speak to, they're acquiring new businesses in new countries, new employees. They won't necessarily have the payroll knowledge in-house on the acquiring company side. That knowledge may sit with the company that's being acquired. And if those people don't then come across as part of that acquisition, the acquiring company has to then look to their payroll vendor, their payroll partner in particular, to give them the guidance, give them advice, give them the security that they can handle, they can cope with these new payrolls that are coming in. If they can't, or that question's not asked and not understood, that quite often will then play into these kind of failure rates that what we're seeing on the screen also as well. So there's lots of things I think organizations could do in a proactive sense to start thinking about what are the critical success factors here? What do we need to get ahead of the curve on? What do we need to be thinking about and working on? And as I've said a few times now, but I do think it's important, and it can't necessarily be expected that global payroll, taxation, law, legislation knowledge can all exist inherently in-house at the organization. But I think it can be expected that when that is the case, that the organization can be partnering with partners and with service providers that do have that level of expertise and knowledge and experience, so that they can help their customers and guide them through that process the best they can. And there's some kind of critical success factors and point on screen there, as some organization may indeed go through that kind of M&A journey. And if we were to produce a checklist around global payroll, that steering group concept, defining the project, a steering group that has the focus on what the end-to-end delivery of a seamless payroll function would look like for the newly expanded organization, whether that's organic growth or in this case M&A growth. Having that focus proactive is certainly a must. Mapping the new countries being moved into, the jurisdictions, the implications around that has to be done in a proactive sense. The organizational analysis, are we quite often with our customers at Amedus, we see businesses acquire new, smaller businesses. They quite often will get onboarded into existing payroll, but then over time, pay groups may initially increase, the number of payrolls may initially increase as a result of the acquisition, but then over time, there's then an opportunity to consolidate those payroll runs and reduce the number of pay groups, the number of payroll runs, and standardize pay frequencies as you then go through that journey. And sometimes, as I alluded to previously, TSA, transition services agreements, is often the time pressured element. That means you just have to get the payroll on board as quickly as you can. But there should always be the opportunity, if that is the case and it's forced upon you, to then look to standardize and consolidate and streamline and gain those efficiencies moving forward also. And the payroll technology in particular should enable that by way of its own agility and flexibility when two or three different pay groups or entities, if you like, are coming together. So there's a lot around that proactive thinking, the risk assessment, mapping out the detail. Do we have the right talent? Do we need to uptrain people in-house? Can we rely on our partner to make sure we've got the right skill sets also to support the M&A activity that's occurring? And then if we then just move on to the concept of growth and hypergrowth. And firstly, I guess just to get a bit of a definition as to what is just normal kind of company average growth and what indeed is hypergrowth. It's generally recognized that when any organization's compounded annual growth rate is 35-40% or more, it's generally considered hypergrowth. When it's more like 15-20%, generally considered more kind of average company growth rate. And we speak to be really candid, we speak to both types of organizations, established 20, 30, 40, maybe longer organizations that are still growing, but at 5, 10, 15%. Or we speak to organizations that might be in year 6 of their journey, year 7 of their journey, and they're going through that hypergrowth stage as well of 30, 40, maybe even 50, 60% growth year on year. Both types of growth, both types of scenarios certainly bring challenges, particularly from a payroll perspective. I think it's fair to say the hypergrowth scenario is probably more challenging than more kind of stable, kind of average growth, if you will. And I think that's because, hypergrowth businesses are, by pure definition, I guess, not surprising that they're focused on growth above all other concerns. So it's that kind of hypergrowth model that companies such as like Amazon made popular, almost counterintuitive to kind of older school ways of thinking, old school business minds. Amazon itself wasn't profitable for many, many years. Hypergrowth organizations rarely are. Growing revenue, acquiring smaller companies, cornering their market sector and defining it is often the priority. Then the company gets established, profitability hits, moving to EBITDA positive. And then it's normally around that kind of point, and certainly with a lot of our conversations that we have with people, they reach a kind of breaking point. They reach a critical mass where they say, okay, you know what, our back office systems, our IT systems in general, particularly around HR or payroll, it was fine when it was 10 employees. It was okay when it was 50 employees. It started to creak and it was falling over a bit when we got to 250 employees. We're now at 1,000 employees and no one can sleep at night for fear, is everyone going to be paid on time and accurately because of current infrastructure? So, you know, that's an extreme, that lasts a scenario. I'm not saying we are brought into companies at that point, but that's the kind of, you know, that's the foresight that a lot of companies see the way that their back office systems will go if change doesn't come about. You know, there is often the conversation where we'll just put more payroll heads into the problem, put more HR heads into the problem to provide the scale and support that hyper growth, but that in itself brings huge risks. So quite often, and again, it probably goes back to that technology related enablement being such a big priority for CEOs at the beginning, that quite often is the catalyst for some of our conversations where organizations have grown, they've grown so quickly, they put pockets of payroll partners in countries they've moved into just because it was an obvious, easy choice at the time, but there's no consolidation and there's no controls, there's no governance, there's no consistency, there's no standardization. And when you reach that critical mass, all of a sudden, that can no longer work. And as I say, a lot of our conversations are happening at that, or they're happening just before the organization themselves get to that kind of point. So in terms of, you know, a checklist to kind of, I guess, be proactive and counteract some of the challenges that come about due to hypergrowth, you know, questions that need to be asked of, can my payroll technology today, can it cope with the capacity and is it suited to the scale that we are going to go through in the years to come? That has to be understood. And if it's a no, you know, organizations have to get ahead of the curve and get ahead of the game and fix that before it's too late. You know, if new geographies are part of the plan, which often they are, can my payroll partner support those new geographies? And I think, as I said, not so 5-10 minutes ago, can my payroll partners actually demonstrate and prove they have experience of delivering payroll and maybe wider taxation support and advice in country for similar kind of organizations, similar types of workforces as well? Having that proactive mindset and having that forward thinking vision as to, okay, you know, can my current providers deliver this, and can they prove and have demonstrable proof of delivering this, has to be a focus. And again, the talent attraction piece, not only from a, you know, supporting hypergrowth perspective, but also quite often in, you know, some of the conversations, again, we unfortunately have, is that the payroll team themselves are so burdened by manual processes. Their days are incredibly long days, long nights, long weekends just to get payroll working. Actually, talent retention just for the payroll teams alone is really challenging because of the pressures put upon them, because of a lack of system, a lack of technology to remove that burden from them themselves. So talent attraction, attracting talent for the organization overall, but also talent to support the payroll function is critical. And quite often fundamental to that will be the question they will ask will be, how are you currently processing payroll? Who is the provider? How do they work with you? What support do you get? You know, and that plays a key part in ensuring you can not only attract key talent and payroll professionals, but also retain them once they're within the organization, because they enjoy the experience and they get the opportunity and time in the monthly payroll calendar to develop themselves, to have forward thinking, career development discussions and plans and trainings and so forth as well. So a few things on screen there, a few things I touched on about kind of checklists and things that I think organizations can be thinking of once they know they're either in that hypergrowth phase or certainly they're heading towards it. Once I think organizations get from 10, 15, 20%, they get 25, 30, you're on a trajectory then. And it's those kind of points proactively, you can start looking forward and start planning and start getting ahead of the curve on some of this. And there's no secret that, you know, to implement new HR payroll technology in particular, allowing for parallel runs, we're talking 3, 6, 9, 12, 18 months, sometimes depending on the number of countries and employees. It's not something that can just be switched on in a week or in a month. So just allowing that lead time and working back from that is another factor in the consideration as to how proactive organizations need to be in addressing some of these points on screen here. And then we'll look at global mobility, and then I think we'll just end on, I guess now, how payroll themselves can kind of enable themselves to be that strategic advisor aligned to global expansion. So a global mobility, and again, this follows kind of previous trends we touched on today, I guess. There's a significant increase really in the mobile workforce and how that's estimated to increase from late 2017, 2018 into what we are now 2023. And a lot of that, I think, is because of the situation the pandemic has put people in. And there's a high percentage of employees that would like moderate to extensive travel after the pandemic now, for other reasons, to be fair to what we may have discussed already, which is they've been home-based, they've been remote for so long, they do actually want to get out and about and start meeting and start traveling again, which is another flip side to what we're seeing as a result of the kind of exit of moving out from what we've experienced in the last couple of years with the pandemic. So I guess we look then, okay, global mobility, people want to move around more. How can that be used and deployed in a very positive way, that global mobility aspect, to support business growth? And you think about talent, you think about closing the skill gap and providing a better basis to solve those kind of localized shortages in talent, getting access to talent, the actual right talent, but also the speed of getting access to talent with people who are willing to move is going to have a significant impact on supporting business growth. So the talent and speed to market is critical. But again, that doesn't come without its challenges. Moving a people from location to location, from home location residents to places of work, if they're seconded, there's often taxation implications around that. There's often payroll legislation and laws that have to be taken into account. And again, if that is happening, that's positive from a business, a business growth perspective. But having that knowledge, having that know-how to make sure that compliance can still be maintained if people are starting to move around more is obviously going to be critical, by way of not inhibiting or not enabling talent moving, and indeed then the organization itself getting an increase in speed to market. And that knowledge transfer, I guess, so when organizations, I guess, are looking to move into new territories, it's not always a case of then hiring new individuals to move in those territories. Quite often, existing experienced employees of the organisations will move and move into those new territories to support that, as well as maybe hiring in those new regions as part of that. Again, there's quite often implications around that from a payroll perspective, from a HR perspective, from a law legislation, from a statutory perspective, that simply has to be observed. And these are exactly some of the key considerations, really, I guess, that need to be considered. Whether it's things like payroll withholding obligations, I mean, they exist in various locations. There's domestic rules, double taxation agreements are often applicable, social security compliance, EU rules, there's often bilateral agreements that have to be reviewed. It's not a choice, it's the rules, and unfortunately the rules will dictate the final answer, so they have to be reviewed. And again, I think it's unfair to expect organizations to possess, it's great if they do, and it's fantastic if they do, but it's probably unfair to expect organizations to possess all this knowledge and know-how in-house, but it's absolutely not unfair to expect your partners around you to be able to have this knowledge and expertise and be able to share that with you to help you navigate some of these ever-changing ways of working. Whether that's, again, even wider beyond payroll, just general employment law, employment policies, even personal tax, corporate tax implications, actual classification of employees, those types of things, all important factors that need to be considered as part of global mobility in particular, and individuals moving from region to region for growth, in this context today, for growth initiatives. So again, there's a checklist, and as I say, these slides will be shared after, so I'm not going to go through every single one, but just a nice, I guess, a nice summary here about some of the things, some of the factors that organizations can consider proactively when it is considering moving employees around the world to support growth objectives, growth initiatives, moving forward as well. And then just for the final kind of five minutes now, then I think we'll open up the floor to some questions. I think there's a couple of questions that have come in already. I can see on the chat here, which is great. We'll spend a bit of time now just to finish, I guess, on how Payroll themselves can enable themselves to be a strategic advisor to the business overall. I mean, we're very much focused on global expansion today, and it's a hot topic for the reasons we've discussed. But overall, Payroll having that opportunity and giving themselves the opportunity, having the time to be real strategic advisors to the organization to support, C-suite objectives, organizational objectives moving forward. And we'll go back to initially that first chart we had on one of the early slides that put up, those priorities, those focus points for CEOs moving forward. But there's factors that can very easily inhibit this kind of growth, the trajectory that many CEOs want to go on. That local in-country payroll knowledge has to be there. The local treasury support knowledge, bearing in mind, employees still need to be paid, statutory payments need to be paid, third-party payments need to be paid. Quite often, when an organization enters into a new market, that new market or new region themselves won't necessarily be revenue generating, but employees do need to be paid. So it'll be a cost center initially. So therefore, how are we going to get funds from a central location into region for employees to be paid? Can we pay statutory returns out of a central bank rather than a local in-country bank? I think Spain is one of those countries where it dictates that statutory returns have to be made from a local Spanish bank, as an example. So there's lots of things that need to be taken in consideration and be considered in advance, because if they're not, they can become an inhibitor to the kind of growth objectives that many organizations will actually have. So I guess that early sight of these things, the in-country payroll knowledge, the speed to onboard employees in those countries, the payroll compliance around that, are all things that we've talked about today at a high to mid-level, but are all factors that continually need to be reviewed to ensure we're reducing risk and ensure the growth can actually occur. And as I've alluded to many times, and I'm a strong believer in it, and that's why I think I've mentioned it a few times, and certainly Amida are a strong believer in this, is that modern technology today and modern service delivery models around technology, specific around payroll, it absolutely has to have the ability to address and support these types of challenges, whether it's legislation compliance, whether it's around accuracy and timeliness of payroll. So for me, accuracy and timeliness, you think about repeatability of existing processes and then templating that for new regions and new countries. It should be fairly repeatable. If it's not, and new processes and new systems have to come in play to support new regions, all of a sudden, accuracy and timeliness could potentially come under threat and be at risk. If it's based on proven processes, proven technology, just now templated onto the new region and a new set of laws and legislation for payroll, there's less risk to things like accuracy and timeliness from a payroll perspective. Same with reporting. Organizations, they'll have reporting capabilities today, hopefully, gross to net reports, geo outputs, variance reporting. Technology really should be able to very simply expand on that and keep a true global gross to net, keep a true global GL report, keep a true global variance report for all countries. If that's not the case, then there's a serious question needs to be asked around the actual underpinning technology that's in play today, because modern technology has to have that ability to address that and support that moving forward. And on the same theme, the last point on there, that ability to integrate, to ensure the agility is there so that integrations can scale and evolve aligned to that growth. We talk a lot about the concept of single interface, multi-country with a lot of our integrations at Amidus. And really what we're talking about there is we're not looking to create integrations country by country. We're looking to create one integration, but then scales across the countries as and when the company grows and new countries are moved into. And that agility aspect around integrations is vitally important to ensure really like risk is certainly mitigated, if not removed totally, as part of that journey. And lastly, before we go into Q&A, so I hope Mel's ready with the questions. I'm sure she is. We think about the kind of workforce data, the reporting and analytics, and it was a previous point on the previous slide there. And there's a kind of a maturity scale around this. And again, technology today should be enabling organizations to get to what's on screen there as being level 4, even level 5, okay? They certainly shouldn't be in that level 0 there, that informational black hole where organizations, they will have the information, but they don't know where it is, they don't know who holds it or where it's housed. By the time they find that all out and get it for monthly reports, the information's already out of date. So you're constantly trying to catch your tail in that kind of scenario. And you move through the various levels there to, basic repeatable reporting, to some defined analytics. But really, modern technology today should be looking at things like predictive analytics or prescribed analytics, prescriptive analytics. And again, if you relate this back to growth initiatives, if companies are looking to grow and move into new regions, is there underlying payroll data there which is available in real time and it has the integrity to be able to support business decisions? Are we going to grow in an existing region in order to determine that what's our true cost of employment? What's our social security cost? What's our true cost of payroll in those regions? Or if we move into these new regions, what's the cost of doing that? Is it easy to scale with the existing provider? What are actually the onboarding requirements around that? Can my system provider actually surface and provide that type of information for me to make that transition? So that kind of, reactive reporting is one thing, but proactive reporting, looking forward, making a forecast around cost, controlling costs around payroll is vital really in supporting any organization's growth trajectory, whether that's just the average growth we talked about, or indeed getting more into the kind of, the hyper growth, the kind of 35, 40% plus growth percentages. So I can see the time's on 50 minutes exactly, which leaves, I think, 10 minutes for questions, Mel, if I'm not wrong. So
yeah, it does. Thanks so much, Peter. That was really interesting. And I'll just say we've got some members that are in hyper growth organisations, and I think the pressure on them as a payroll department is immense. So it's a hard situation. Okay, so here are the questions. Where do you start when looking for HR payroll partners?
I'm not pausing, I'm having a water because my throat's going. Where do you start with? Sorry, just repeat it. Sorry.
Where do you start when looking for HR payroll partners?
So for me, I think, where do you start? The first question needs to be really understanding your scope, your payroll frequency, not just today, but also, do you have line of sight of looking at that over the next 3-5 years? Because as we talked about today, it's not just about today, it's about tomorrow. And if you make a decision based on today, you could be ill-equipped to deal with tomorrow. So my personal advice would be to look at what today looks like, but try the best you can to get line of sight of what the future looks like, and then align yourself to a payroll partner that can comprehensively and have the demonstrable proof and experience to cover those kind of requirements as well. Likewise, certainly with Amidus, most of our customers we work with, they'll be working with one of a few global HRISs. And if they've gone through that transformation, and given how critical the payroll input data is from global HRSs into payroll, understanding that part, and then understanding, okay, can my payroll partner, are they certified to integrate with my actual HCM solution as well? So there's some pretty key fundamental questions I think you can ask yourself and ask therefore the vendors when you start your search. And I think quite quickly, you can whittle it down, whether you're 100 employees, 2 countries, 1,000 employees, 10 countries, 20,000 employees, 30 countries. Quite quickly, you can almost create your shortlist without even have to get into RFI, RFP stage.
Okay. Does Amedis platform accommodate US payroll and other countries' payrolls in one platform?
Yes, we only have one platform.
Nice.
This isn't a discussion really about Amedis, but as I'm asked the question, yeah, we have one platform. It's Amedis IP. We'll only ever have one platform for all pay. So we cover 153 countries, I think it is, as of today.
Yeah.
All on the one. Yeah.
Thanks, Peter. And thank you for asking that question, whoever that was.
Yeah, thank you.
In thinking about M&A, what are the biggest pain points when it comes to integrating payroll systems? Is there a best practice for moving from one payroll system to another, or should we run the systems and processes separately and assemble the data together for reporting purposes?
Absolutely not to the last part of that question. No. There are pain points in integrating payroll systems. Yes, we can't bury our head in the sands around that. Often data migration is a challenge. Finding the data, accessing the data, is the data in machine readable formats when you migrate from a previous provider into one. That is challenging, that is difficult, but your payroll partners should be able to advise when is the right time to do that for certain countries based on that country's payroll periods. So some countries, I think Italy, are more quarterly. France is highly recommended because of the complexity not to migrate 9, 10, 11 months of data. You want to migrate 1 or 2 months of data to minimize the risk. So a payroll partner should be able to navigate, help a customer navigate through what that journey looks like to mitigate the risk. But the challenges overall, in summary, the challenges involved in migrating data far outweigh the disadvantages of having separate data sets, separate reporting, separate systems to run payroll in an M&A type situation.
Okay, it's another Amedis question. Will Amedis interface with Workday?
Yes, Amedis are certified Workday partner, certified in over 100, I can't remember the number of countries, my marketing team will kill me, but over 100 countries. So yeah, we absolutely are.
Okay. Okay, this is a good question. How do we go about convincing our budget holder that we need to change payroll systems? I know that our current provider won't be able to support us as we grow, but I'm afraid I won't be able to get budget to make the change. That's a really good question.
Excuse me. Anyone in England know it's very hot today, so yeah,
very hot.
I'm getting a dry. Yeah, so it's obtaining budget for any kind of transformation project is challenging, whether that's HR, payroll, other systems. Where we see our customers normally start is, first of all, what's today's world look like? What's the total cost of ownership of payroll today? And when I say that, not just the cost of the system, but the cost of the people around it, the time spent, who's involved doing what, the touch points. So you quite often, when you look at a total cost of ownership to build a business case to obtain budget, you look at it from a known cost perspective: salary costs, time, effort, staffing costs, systems costs, etc. But then you have another side, which is more the kind of unknown costs, but the risk to non-compliance, the risk of data security, the risk of GDPR fines, the risk of payroll errors and paying either overpaying or underpaying employees, and the impact that could have on retention. You build those two things together and understand today's world, and then whoever the chosen provider is, they should be able to demonstrate with proof points what their total cost of ownership would be, and therefore what the future model would look like. And really through that exercise, and it's an extensive exercise and one we do a lot with our customers when we're in that stage of the process, 99% of the times there'll be a very compelling reason then to move systems, not just from a quantifiable perspective that a CFO, a finance director, a CEO could see and understand, but also from a risk perspective as well. So yes, it's a challenge, and quite often new systems that you move to, new payroll platforms will at base level cost more than existing systems. There will be a premium to that. but the value that's delivered as a part of that premium not only negates that increase and more, and that's where the business case normally is derived from. Yeah.
Do you think since COVID, it's been a bit easier for that the case, you know, to put the case forward, or do you think it hasn't made a change or a difference?
I don't think it's easier. I think the awareness is certainly there that there's a need to change and we have to change. We're at risk of changing. Is it easier to get business cases agreed and signed off by teams and etc.? I don't think it is. It's still, you know, people are still very cost conscious, and we only have to look at, well, I don't personally look at the news because it gets depressing, but you look at, you know, interest rates in the UK increase, you know, there's significant pressures on organizations across the globe, but the awareness is certainly there. And the awareness is there from a risk perspective, from a growth perspective. And we've seen some of that today as well about the focus of digitization, technology-led priorities. I think it's probably, you know, quite often it's more competing priorities and competing projects, and actually making your payroll project stand out as being the number one and being business critical.
Yeah, okay. Got time for one last question. If we're moving into new regions, how can we access the payroll information in advance so we can be best prepared for onboarding?
If we move into new regions, how? Okay, so the in-country. Okay, I think I understand. Okay, so really, you know, a payroll partner really should be able to surface that information well in advance of actual payroll processing. So what I mean by that is, quite often in kind of legacy payroll models, you run payroll, you start doing your gross to net calculations, and it's at that point, so imagine a payroll calendar, payroll day 20, 21 in the calendar, you run the process, it's at that point you identify, quite often there's gaps in data, there's errors in data, there's badly formatted data. So providers today really should be able to surface that much further sooner in the process, day one in the payroll calendar, or even months before onboarding started. So organizations can know the data that's required and it's there in front of them to obtain well in advance of payroll processing. You don't no longer is it the case that you have to wait for payroll processing to then know the payroll information that's required. You should be able to do that in advance, either through the technology or through CSV type templates, to enable that kind of, you know, to kind of surface that information to teams to obtain in advance. Yeah.
Okay. Right, thank you so much, Peter. I think we've sort of come to a natural end, haven't we, to the webinar? But thank you for sharing all your information and knowledge. It's really interesting. And there's so many points on there that are really important that people are struggling with, aren't they? So it's fantastic. So thank you. If people want to contact you, what's the best way for them to contact you? Is it via LinkedIn or?
LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn, or I can share email addresses either via yourself, Mel, or Mel, you've probably got my details.
Yeah.
Feel free to share my details, or I look after the EMEA commercial team, Tiffany, VP of Marketing and Alliance. So yeah, between us, we'll make sure you're in touch with the right people if people want to get in contact.
Fantastic. And if you do have any questions after this webinar, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll make sure that we send those on to Peter to get answered. So as I said, thank you so much. It's been really interesting. Thank you for everyone that's joined us today. We have got a series of webinars that we are running with the Immedis team. So we look forward to seeing you all again soon. So thank you.
Thank you.